So Jeremy Della is the curator of the exhibition upstairs, Love Is Enough, Andy Warhol and William Morris, which I hope you've all seen. If you haven't, I strongly recommend going to see it almost immediately, but not until after this. Jeremy is, I guess, well, his projects have made him one of the most celebrated artists of his generation. The inflatable Stonehenge project, Sacrilege, his extraordinary restaging of the Battle of Orgreave are some of the sort of most popular and well-known projects he's done, but he's also had any number of prizes and huge exhibitions. He was awarded the Turner Prize in 2004 and had a retrospective of his works called Joy and People at the Haywoods, which was another fabulous show in 2012, and in 2013 I think it was representing Britain at the Venice Biennale, so has been all around the world and done a great deal of good for British art, I would say. The exhibition brings together two artists that Jeremy speaks of as being real touchstones for him in his practice, and I think it's going to be an interesting night to hear some more about that, about how the exhibition came about and why. Jeremy will be talking to Anthony Doffe, who is one of the most successful and pioneering gallerists and collectors, I would say, certainly in my lifetime, the last 50 years, more, I'd say. He had his first gallery in London when he was about 25, and went on to represent and sell some work by some of the biggest figures in contemporary art and modern arts of the last century, including Gerhard Richter and Joseph Beuys, and of course Andy Warhol. He is also mentioned, which is kind of cool, I think, so I'm going to read you a little quote which has been found in one of Andy's diaries, which I'm sure Anthony has heard a million times, but it is good, so I'm going to read it anyway. It's for an entry, Sunday the 6th of July 1986, and it says, got to Concord, was met by Anthony Doffe, went to the Ritz Hotel, had a really big double room, like 3 rooms. Cabbed to Mr. Chow's, all these great people, Mick and Jerry and all the English swells. It's pretty good, isn't it? But more importantly, I guess, is the show upstairs, and it really couldn't have happened without the help that Anthony has given us, both in terms of the works that he's lent, some of which you can see upstairs, but also the support and advocacy that he gave us with any number of partners and organisations, particularly the Warhol Foundation, among many others. So we do owe him a huge debt of gratitude for that. So thank you very much, Anthony. However, I'm also very much looking forward to hearing what he has to say about this and the conversations that we're going to be hearing this evening. Before we get to that, a couple of very quick things. First of all is to say that you all have on your seats the maps of the artist rooms that Anthony is involved with the Tate, and if you wish to visit them, please do, and I'll tell you where they all are and which artists are involved. The other thing to say is that you may have noticed, I hope, that this exhibition is free, this talk is free, along with everything that we do here, and we would like to try and keep it that way. If you feel that you would like to help support and would like to keep these things free, then do please donate to us upstairs in the shop or in the boxes, wherever. Last of all, can I say, please turn off your phones, if you haven't already, so we don't ruin the recordings for the evening. And I will hand over to Jeremy and to Anthony.
Jeremy Della presents.
Hey, do you want it?
Yes.
Nice.
Jeremy Della presents William Morris's Neptune, throwing Roman Abramovich's yacht into the Grand Canal. A demonstration of the power of nature over conspicuous consumption. William Morris is like strontium 90. We all have him in our bones. For people of my generation, William Morris has been a conscious presence throughout our lives. He is there in the arts and crafts furniture, and in the suburban architecture of my youth. He is there in the timeless shirts, and in the intellectual sockless dinner parties. My wife's grandmother was still wearing her Indian sandals manufactured by Edward Carpenter in the 1890s at the time of the Festival of Britain. Our house in Deering Street in London has had William Morris wallpaper for these last 50 years. From the 1950s onwards, we collected printed books by all the greats of the movement. We showed works of art in our gallery by the generations of artists influenced by William Morris, his friends and associates, from Eric Gill all the way through to Joseph Beuys. The ideas behind the protection of the land, the protection of historic buildings, the Green Party, banning the bomb, organic farming, the Ramblers Association. One can go on and on and on. Although ostensibly depicting everyday external images, Andy Warhol scrutinized urban society from the inside, working with our secret desires, our darker instincts, our fascination for myth, and our preoccupation with death. He was interested in how the eye sees, how lines and colours are constructed. He watched how people interact, how they display in order to attract one another. He worked with the damaged parts of life. His own life had been so damaged in 1968 that he almost died. He loved rather than judged. And 30 years after his passing, his work now feels prophetic in every sense. We commissioned Andy to make his last self-portraits, the so-called Fright Wigs, in 1986. We were working with him on new portraits of Samuel Beckett, just days before he died. John Richardson, in his memorial address at St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York on the 1st of April 1987, spoke about Andy as the holy fool, the eternal outsider wandering through life innocent, childlike, a simpleton, a visionary though, in whom there shone a sacred light. Looking at William Morris and Andy Warhol together, we see just how different and how similar they were. Morris was fighting the battles of his time and place, just as Warhol was fighting his. Morris, the medieval knight on horseback, is a good descriptive image of the man and his message. Andy Warhol, the holy fool, was leading his own ground-breaking crusade. Both are part of who we are and our history, which we cannot and should not escape. Art is an everyday struggle of life and death, of right and wrong. Both Morris and Warhol lived their lives through art. William Morris summed it all up for everyone, both then and now, when he said, "What business have we with art at all unless we can all share it?" He was speaking for all of us, for everyone in this room, and indeed for artists' rooms. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony, for that. We're just going to turn the lights down a touch on us. And I'm Jeremy, by the way. And Anthony wanted to read that out just so we know we get those ideas out before we have this kind of free-ranging conversation. We want it to be quite intimate evening in a way, which is why the lighting lasts like a kind of candlelit dinner almost. So I hope you appreciate that. We're going to talk about many things, this show, about the artists, about Anthony's life in art a little bit, about my life in art, and maybe the importance of art in our lives, in museums, And then finally, artist rooms, which is almost like the future, isn't it? We're talking about young people now, and our childhoods and our relationship to art. So this is where we begin the talk with this image. Some of you might know this building in South London, the Woman's Museum, designed by the same architect that designed Whitechapel. And it's where I spent a lot of time as a young person looking at the incredible collections they have there. And it was a very important part of my life, going there and looking at incredible anthropological collection they had. It's very similar to the Pit-Rivers in a way, especially as the formal displays were very, very crowded, very busy, the kind of thing a child just loves, just looking at all these different things.
It's good also to take on board that we're the only country in the world, roughly speaking, where the museums are free, and what an incredible and important thing that is. And we sometimes forget it, and the sacrifices that need to be made to keep that the case. But it is an incredible gift. Artist Rooms has something like 5.5 million visitors every year, and every show is free in all the museums.
And I suppose free museums mean that young people, children, can go when they want. They don't have to sort of think about it. So that was something that for me was very important. So I spent my early years in museums, especially the museums of South London, and I think that's why I'm at ease in museums and doing shows in museums. It's a world I know and a world I love, and it's a world I'm very happy to be around.
And what a magic place the Horniman Museum is.
Absolutely. For a child, it's just full of weird and wonderful objects that puzzle me still today. So it was a very happy time. Now, Anthony, you might want to, now it's your turn to talk about your life in museums.
I was born in Sheffield and brought up in Leicester, and there's a beautiful museum in Leicester in a walkway called New Walk, which you see here, and there's the museum on the right. And from a very early age, my mother parked me in the museum when she went shopping and had coffee mornings, and then she'd pick me up 2 hours later and say, has he been well behaved? And so I had 2 hours on my own, and I would say that that experience totally changed my life, and being with beautiful works of art, you know, nice Victorian paintings, really good, beautiful Victorian paintings, and a great collection of German expressionist paintings. Here's Red Woman by Franz Marc of 1912. I was born in 1940, so this was not called German art, it was called Middle European art at the time. But later on we were to represent Joseph Beuys, Gerhard Richter, Anselm Kiefer, George Barzleff, and Sigmar Polke. I think it all came from looking at this as a child.
So when you were looking at these works, did you really know what they represented, or was it just something very mysterious to you?
It was mysterious and thrillingly exciting.
Was your kind of cultural life at home or at school very limited, and this was like a...
Yeah, there was nothing else that I could compare it to. And I think the experience of being on your own with works of art. Paul Klee said, if you want to look at works of art, first of all sit down. And I used to sit down and look at paintings like this, and then I would close my mind and try and imagine them, and then I'd turn around and see if I could feel them in the back of my neck, if you understand what I mean. See if a work of art had a presence which was beyond visible. So I used to try very hard to use works of art as a way of, as a sort of spiritual tool, if you like, as a sort of meditation, as a deep way of seeing the world. Yeah. And when in the 50s, this beautiful Francis Bacon painting was given by the Contemporary Art Society of Leicester, this was a mysterious experience to me, because I knew he didn't draw like that, I knew the colours were wrong, and yet why, for heaven's sake, was the painting so powerful that you couldn't get it out of your mind? And It was thrilling later on when we, in 1970, we started representing Lucian Freud, so I saw Francis Bacon a lot and became good friends, that I'm sure that this painting pointed the way to, for a teenager to see the world in a new way and to really understand art.
I imagine Leicester in 1959, getting a painting like that must have been quite an event, because it's quite an extreme painting for like 1950s Britain.
And what a wonderful thing the Contemporary Art Society was doing, giving that to a regional museum. And what a profound effect it can have on you to be brought up with that painting down the road. And this was a sculpture by Epstein of a woman mourning. And I remember as a very young child, it was on a plinth, looking up at it and my eyes filling with tears because I could see that she was mourning and I had to sort of imagine what it was about. And years later I made great friends with Kathleen Epstein, and she kindly gave us the drawings for the Oscar Wilde tomb, and we did a beautiful exhibition of them, and then we did a show of Vorticism in '69, which became an Arts Council touring show. But it all came from looking at this sculpture in this later period of Epstein's incredibly distinguished work.
So as a child going through these galleries, now you're very interested in children visiting galleries, aren't you? It's almost the raison d'etre for artistry.
Absolutely. And we work with 6 to 12-year-olds, teenagers and students, and we think the shows really, most importantly, are for them, because the world, let's face it, more than anything else, needs creative young people. If the world is to survive, because as you all know, it's heading for some hateful, terrifying waterfall, collapse, disaster, poisoning, global warming, apocalypse.
But that's actually a very William Morris idea, isn't it? That creativity should be at the centre of our lives, but also it's a way out. It's a positive thing.
Absolutely.
So the next image.
Hey, that might just be a teenage boy in Paris paying homage to Oscar Wilde. And there is the tomb, the Jacob Epstein tomb of Oscar Wilde in Père Lachaise Cemetery, which is carved, believe it or not, this is almost a secret, by Eric Gill.
So how old are you in that picture?
17.
And you went on a pilgrimage basically?
Yeah. My dad ran away, and I left school, and he left £500 for my further education, and I decided not to go back to school, but to go and live in Paris for as long as the money would last.
How long was that?
About 7 months.
So, you had a good time in Paris?
I had a good time, and it's also, it was time to think, and it was time to lead a metropolitan life.
Yeah, yeah. From Leicester, which I imagine was quite a buttoned-up existence in a way.
It was quite a jump.
Yeah, in a good way. So you probably went to that grave because of Epstein as well as because of Wilde, I imagine.
Absolutely. I mean, the tragic story of Wilde. Art is very often the story of outsiders. People who take risks, people who, get into trouble, people who do things for the first time. And it's impossible not to admire Wilde, and it's impossible not to admire Epstein and Eric Gill, and by incredible good fortune, they were all part of my life.
I think today's talk is a way of, one of the subtexts is about meeting artists and what that can do to you. We have a number of photographs of people meeting artists, and that's you in a way meeting Oscar Wilde, in a sense, isn't it? Even though he's not alive, you're basically communing with him. So, moving swiftly on, can you tell us a little bit about the gallery? This is 1986, this is Warhol in the gallery, but can you tell us about the gallery itself before 1986?
Well, we had a gallery from 1965, and then in 1976, 77, I got married to a curator from the Tate, Anne Seymour, who was pretty instrumental in buying the bricks, the infamous bricks by Carl Andre. And I think after being married about a year, I remember her saying at the breakfast table, you know, if I tried really, really, really hard, I could make you into a modern person. And for about a year and a half, she tried very hard. And then the three of us, and my wife, Marion Louise, who's here this evening, and I opened this big gallery, and we had the idea that we could invite all the greatest artists in the world to show with us in London, which wasn't a place that people came to really at that time for contemporary art, and that we could do these shows for the international art world and for students. And pretty much we showed all the artists in the world that we wanted to show, from William de Kooning through to Jeff Koons.
I mean, I remember the gallery, I'm sure a lot of you remember the gallery, and I know it's almost a cliche now to say this, but really, there was nowhere else in London really to go. I mean, can I mention another gallery? There was the Listen Gallery, obviously, but they dealt in a very different style of conceptual art, whereas Anthony's gallery was truly in a very exciting place to go, because if you didn't know what show it was on, you always knew you were going to see something you'd never see otherwise. And the openings were fantastic, very glamorous events for a young person to be at. But it was always, it wasn't unwelcoming either. You go up there and you walk around and you wouldn't be made to feel unwelcome. And it was
some pretty girls at the desk.
There was that as well, which is always an incentive. So we had a good, you know, it was a great place to go and to see things, and it was an education really. So
and we tried to do two things. We tried to work with museums. We worked very hard with artists to do great shows, and we worked with museums to get the works of art that we showed into museum collections. In the last year, 2001, when we closed, we sold 55% to museums around the world.
Which as an artist, speaking as an artist, is where you want your work to end up, because you know it won't be sold on, it won't be damaged, it'll be looked after well, and it will be seen by many people, not just a couple. So that's a very important thing for artists to have those institutional sales, as we call them. Now, this photograph is taken in 1986 at one of your shows, a very incredibly famous show, the Warhol self-portraits. Can you tell us about working with Andy Warhol, meeting him?
So at this time, we opened the gallery in 1980, so I saw Andy Warhol around the whole time. When we were in Soho, he was walking around, he was having shows, and it was easy to go to the factory, and it was easy to meet him, and easy to talk to him. And really, he was also friends with Joseph Beuys, who was the opening show that we did. And so from the time I met him, I was saying, Andy, you know, why don't we do a big show now? Yeah, great. And Andy, what do you feel like, what sort of show would you like to do? He said, Anthony, it's entirely up to you, I'll do whatever you want. So, you know, 99.9% of the artists in the history of the world, that is the last thing that they would ever say. No artist who is in his right mind would say to an art dealer, I'll do anything you want. And Andy Warhol's reputation had, in a sense, fallen over 10, 12 years. And, you know, all the smart people said of the work of the 70s that it was disappointing, and he was doing society portraits. There'd even been a show at the Whitney saying that in the 1977. And people said, you know, from Mao, all the work went downwards. So I thought, and there was some sort of feeling that art dealers had encouraged him in that. The retrospectives, the reversals, looked like art dealers trying to find things that would sell, rather than taking on new areas, taking on risks, getting him really to stretch himself. So I couldn't think what to say to the artist, what to say to Warhol, and then it just happened that that Christmas we spent with Joseph Beuys in Naples, and on Christmas Day we went to visit an architect, and in his bedroom on the first floor there was a large Andy Warhol portrait of Joseph Beuys, that sort of hypnotic gaze. And as I walked into the room, I thought, this is the greatest portrait painter of the second half of the 20th century, who has solved the problems of portraiture by embracing photography as opposed to turning his back on it. And what I should do is get Andy Warhol to do a great self-portrait, because it's years since he's done such a thing. And 3 days later I was in New York and said that to Andy, and he said, a great idea, let's do that. Come back in 10 days and look at all the photographs together. And 10 days later we're looking at the photographs. Cut a long story short, we did these paintings which are called the Fright Week paintings, and it was a colossal success from every point of view. Not only did lots of paintings go to museums immediately, and these wonderful camouflage self-portraits, but it got great reviews. And I think that this image is part of the revaluation of Andy, that in fact all those pictures which people really hated, like, should we say, the camouflages upstairs, or the dollar signs, that those are not dumb pictures, banal pictures, but they're actually prophetic pictures.
Absolutely. And then that picture of him we just saw, what you don't realise is, I don't know if I can get it. No? What you don't realise is he's being photographed there by about 50 people. But look at his face, it's absolutely blank, isn't it? It's kind of amazing. He's like lost in his own thoughts. There's no expression or anything. It's an incredible photograph. But I went to the opening of this show, and this is how I really know you. I didn't meet you there,
yes.
But this is when our paths crossed, basically. And unforgettably for me, I have to say, because I'm going to tell the story again.
Good.
I hope, because I met, that's me and Andy Warhol at the Ritz. The story at the Ritz, having a night at the Ritz, not the whole night, I hasten to add, but having an evening at the Ritz at the expense of Anthony Dauphet Gallery, because I had dinner there and room service and all sorts. So thank you, Anthony, for paying for that. I can tell you now, it wasn't cheap, I tell you. I met Warhol at that opening. For me, Warhol was just this figure, this absolute giant. And I had no idea that his career had slipped or he wasn't popular anymore, because he was Andy Warhol. It didn't really matter. He was this character. He was like Statue of Liberty or Uncle Sam or whatever. For me, he seemed like a timeless figure. And I had to go to the opening, and I saw the invite. It was a lovely red self-portrait, wasn't it?
That's right.
I didn't even have an invite. I was just shown one by someone, and I noted where it was and the time. I was at the Courtauld at that time. I was 20. I went to the opening, ran in without even because I wasn't invited, and then hung around. And then he arrived with his entourage, about 6 people, maybe 5, 6 people, and it was chaos. And then he signed some things. He signed 2 things to me: a baseball cap that said Tower Hamlets on the front, and a bag, a picture of George Michael and Andrew Ridgeley. It said Wham written on the front. And I thought he'd like that, because it was for me that was a reference to Roy Lichtenstein, but also had these 2 good-looking guys on, and I thought he'd like, and he did. He signed that and sort of laughed. And then one of his mates just sidled up to me and said, "Oh, come and see us at the Ritz tomorrow night." And I thought, should I do this or not? And I thought, yes, I'm going to do it. I took a friend with me, and we spent a couple of hours playing around, having photographs taken, drinking, just mucking about really with him and his friends there, the entourage. And that's one of the photographs. And that, that's a sort of life-defining moment for anyone, let alone someone who wants to be an artist who becomes an artist.
It's also a cute photograph.
It's quite fun. It was very cute. And that hat was like a psychedelic coloured hat that I bought at a jumble sale. For some reason I didn't take any colour photographs that night. It's all black and white, which is a pity because the hat was totally psychedelic. It's a funny hat. But anyway, so after that, he invited me and my friend to go to the factory, and we spent a couple of weeks hanging around the factory, met him a few more times, and within 6 months he was dead, or less than 6 months, which was great, you know, terrible thing. But it was an amazing moment for me to be in that environment and to see how he had made this incredible world for himself in New York, and he seemed to be doing whatever he wanted, and had this incredible freedom and a very enjoyable life. I mean, it wasn't really the case when you read the diaries, but he created a template for what contemporary artists was going to be. And,
don't you think that one of the things that's extraordinary is that his work feels incredibly alive today?
Still very.
And when you see the works upstairs, you know, it's difficult to believe that artist is dead because they feel incredibly present and, as I said, prophetic. They feel alive and they feel about this time now, not about 1986.
Yeah, even that big black and white painting, which is an artist's room painting of the missile bases in Russia. I mean, what are we all worried about now? We're about Russia again. And so it's all come back. And so he was prophetic, and a visionary, like Morris. I think they both shared that. They're both futuristic artists who are ahead of their time. And so within their time, they probably weren't as appreciated as much as they could have been.
And also, when you think about Warhol and think about the 60s through to the 80s, he was always encouraging young people, especially good-looking ones like this guy. And the factory, the life of the factory, was led by people's desire to break new boundaries, to do new things, new films, new music, new magazines, new way of communicating. And so what he's doing here is what he did for 30 years.
Yeah, I mean, he was, I think, subsequently when I met him, he was very interested in what was going on, where I'd been, who I'd met, what the music was like, what people were doing. So it's like, it's kind of an intelligence gathering operation.
And he's collaborating with Jean-Michel Basquiat at the time, doing big paintings,
yeah,
which were seen as the world's most horrible paintings at the time, and now look pretty amazing.
Absolutely. I mean, I suppose a lot of his work is about youth, isn't it? The sort of, you think of the portraits, he tries to make people look as young and as good looking as possible.
Absolutely.
He's absolutely sort of obsessed with that. Anyway, so Anthony, thank you for having that show. It's a sort of a life-changing thing, and of course that's what we're interested in, I suppose, both of us, are life-changing opportunities that art gives us, and works of art and artists give us. So, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the exhibition.
Now let's be sober.
Yes, let's talk art history. So, when Sally asked me if I would do this show, she had the idea, and because she'd been thinking about artists that I liked and talked about. It was something I was very interested in because, as someone who trained as an art historian and liked museums and liked museum collections, I feel, like I said, at home in museums. I'm quite happy to work with collections and try out possibly new things within it. And so this show seemed like a great opportunity to do that and to bring these two men together.
And when you think about it, it's a crazy idea, but it isn't a crazy idea, and it works incredibly well. It's a really interesting idea, taking people from two different continents, from two different centuries, and putting them together and talking about art and contemporary issues. And that's an amazing achievement, Sally. That was an amazing idea, Jeremy, to do that.
Wish I'd had that idea, but I sort of let me have it in a sense. So I'll just go through the show a little bit. You've all seen it, but just to explain my thinking behind it. So we begin with this great tapestry, this epic work, and it's a great way to start the show with this sort of blockbuster work, really. To set out your stall, it's an ambitious show, so we have a big, ambitious work at the beginning. And of course, the attainment of the Grail, big, lofty ideas and ideals about medieval life and about spirituality and so on. And really one of the kind of climactic scenes from this series of tapestries. And I just wanted that to begin the show. And it's a room about beauty and sort of almost perfection, human perfection and beauty, and also the childhoods of Warhol and Morris were full of art and were full of, not necessarily going to galleries, though I suspect Warhol went to the Carnegie Museum a lot, where he would have found, it's one of the most amazing museums, isn't it, Anthony?
Yes, but I think he also went to church a lot, and that meant a great deal to him.
Yeah.
And, in later life, it wasn't so well known, but Andy went and took Mass, every day when he could. And he did charitable works, and you can see in the show upstairs hints of his preoccupations.
And we have a photograph.
Civil rights,
yes,
for example.
Yes, social justice, I think, is something
Exactly.
we tend to forget about him.
100%.
And so in the show there's an image of a church he went to almost every day with his mother, which is full of icons with gold and bright colours. And so if you know about that, then you know about Hollywood, then it's quite clear that he also is thinking about an ideal society where everyone was beautiful and acted in the correct way and so on with his portraits. So there you have the sort of his version, in a way, for Hollywood. That sort of unobtainable place or mythical place almost, isn't it? In a way, Hollywood is a mythical place, as is Camelot. And that's why this section is called Camelot, also to do with the Kennedy family on the right.
And that was an amazing thing at the time, that the Kennedy family invited artists and musicians and contemporary people to the White House, and that there was a great makeover done by Jackie of the White House. Everybody felt, here it is a great presidency, and the fact that she was beautiful and he was powerful and handsome, and who remembers Ich bin ein Berliner, all those things. We felt like, that here were the people leading the free world, and it was a very exciting moment.
Yes, so we've got a great idealism, really.
Exactly.
And then great tragedy, which of course is in a lot of medieval literature, and a great staple of great literature is the tragedy, but the hero and heroine and so on. So that's what this really is about. And then on the left you see the small, can't really tell what that is really, but that's Shirley Temple signed a photograph of Andy Warhol when he was 13. They were both the same age and he adored her. And if you look at that Shirley Temple, when you look at subsequent images of women he made, they're very, very
Who
similar.
can remember in this room being 13 and being in love? And how painful that was. Was there any pain that one has in one's life that equals the pain of being in love when you're 13?
Yeah, so he was probably in love with Shirley Temple, and so that is a very important thing from his personal collection, which is from the Warhol Museum. What the great thing about Warhol is he kept everything, so it makes shows like this actually quite a delight to make.
Absolutely.
Now this is an image you're very interested in, Anthony. I was interested in layering things and making these very stark juxtapositions, really, of the beauty of the wallpapers with the ugliness of some of the work, especially this one, particularly the Alabama Race Riot series. It's an image of a man being basically stripped, clothing being stripped by some Alsatians. And
Yes, a black man, and this, of course, is right in the centre of civil rights. And it's interesting to remember that this is just the time, right at the beginning of the 60s, when every person in the Western world had a television set. So what you saw in Montgomery on your television set in America was also seen in Europe and in, strangely enough, the Soviet Union. And so these were images which, of course, were not very flattering for America, but which were very much embraced by the Soviet world, which very usefully found something with which to attack America. That this was not a free society, it was not a democratic society, and that black people were really third-class citizens.
I think you and I are both interested in this work by Warhol because he so often seems being a very shallow, superficial person, and the art is shallow and superficial. But of course, we remember the 60s almost through his work. That is how the 60s are remembered, through his work. And images like this are almost the most famous images from that era of the civil rights struggle.
Absolutely. Oh, this is just a piece that we were very, very happy to get for this country. It's a great work by Bruce Nauman called with the words violins, violence, silence. And for me, for many years, this was a sort of iconic work that I dreamt about. There was only one version of it. Imagine an artist who actually does a neon piece, but there's only one copy of it. There wasn't even an exhibition copy or an AP. Jeff Koons could have taught Bruce Nauman a thing or two. But for me, this was the story of the American dream. This was Ellis Island, 1900, people arriving from all parts of Europe and Russia and Eastern Europe to make a new life in America and to become Americans, right up to the 22nd of November 1963, when Camelot exploded, and in Dallas, in the motorcade, JFK was shot.
Yes, and I suppose you and I both see art and history as almost being inseparable in that respect. And that's what I'm interested in. You seem very interested in as well.
Yeah.
Just going back to the show, these are two works by that Anthony very kindly lent us, thank God. Every work by Warhol in the Flower Room was or is owned by Anthony, so he helped us out immensely in that room. Because getting Warhols now is a very difficult thing, because the value of the work is so high that private collectors don't want to lend unless you get special insurance. Even though the government will cover insurance, they won't lend unless you get special insurance, so it costs £30,000 for one painting for insurance, and then you have shipping and you have couriers and so on. So it's very, very difficult getting hold of. Well, it's impossible actually, it's really difficult to get and Anthony came to our rescue like a sort of knight in shining armour, continuing medieval imagery, and with these great works, this one, and of course this incredible piece. Tell us a little bit about this piece, Anthony. Tell me a story about it.
Camouflage, midway between the battlefield and the high street fashion. That's an extraordinary comparison, stretching from that world into the other world. There's only one artist who could ever contemplate such a thing, let alone achieve it. And I think of all the camouflage paintings that Andy did, I always felt that this was the greatest one, and there was an opportunity at one moment to be able to acquire it. And now I'm happy to tell you that it's looked after by the Tate and the National Galleries of Scotland. It belongs to everybody in this room.
Which is a great thing. And now I wanted this room, in a minute we're going to talk about artist rooms, but just to finish on the show, I wanted this room to be so overwhelming that you wouldn't even need to read the little labels about each work, because you just appreciate them for what they were. I mean, we put labels in obviously, but if I was to do the show again, I would just take all the labels out and you just walk around and just like drink it in almost, because I wanted it to be as sort of...
And it's shocking, isn't it? And it's beautiful.
Yeah.
And it's unlike anything else. And that's Andy, to be able to do it in 4 different colours. And when just before he went into hospital to have an operation from which he didn't recover, as you know, Andy Warhol rang me up, and we were talking about doing a Samuel Beckett portrait, which once again was my idea, because Andy didn't have any ideas, or pretended he did. He said how much Beckett was looking forward to being photographed and being the subject of an exhibition. And his last words were to me, "And Anthony, I'm going to paint the show for you in really pretty colours." Those were the last words I heard. I would say those were really pretty colours as well. And that idea from the battlefield to the high street, I think, is an amazing achievement.
Absolutely. So now, we get on to...
It's also an amazing thing when you've been shot to do a great diptych of that type of gun with which you were shot. And there's one of those dollar signs a giant one on the right-hand side, and 4 skulls, which were one of his signature images.
So this now we're into the sort of, this is artist rooms. Can you just explain what artist rooms is?
So artist rooms was 50 rooms of contemporary art, from Joseph Beuys to Andy Warhol, from Damien Hirst to Jeff Koons, that we put together, and which now, as I say, belong to the Tate and National Galleries of Scotland, and which tour the country. We have about 25 shows every year and are seen by 5 to 6 million people, and are aimed towards young people. And we've had 32 million visitors in 5.5 years, and it's a big success. And it reaches, it's democratic. I like the idea that it's socialist as well. That is to say that everything's free and it's for the people, so to speak. And
it was it was originally, the original artist rooms, when you founded it, was basically your personal collection of art, which you kind of donated to the nation, effectively. Is that correct?
I never collected art in that way. Sometimes there were things that I felt shouldn't leave the country, so those things were there. But also, you know, we closed the gallery when I was 61, and I thought, with a bit of luck, there's still time in my life for another adventure. And so Mary Louise, Anne and I started to work on this, and we had a house by Philip Johnson in New York, which we sold, and that provided some money. And we were very, very, very fortunate to be able to buy great things. And then artists were enormously generous to us and gave us millions and millions and millions of dollars worth of gifts so that they could be shared by everyone. And so the collection has grown and grown and grown. And
so we see some images of it?
Yes, please. Hey.
This is great. Gee.
I'll be as an acolyte of Jeremy Della, do you think?
My hair hasn't gone that colour yet. So with artist rooms, you do a lot of youth projects, a lot of education projects, and this is in Hull, I believe. Is that correct? The Ferrens Gallery in Hull.
And that's part of the poster. We've got a big collection of 125 posters of Andy Warhol, which always tell the story of the life of Andy Warhol, because some of them are about films, some of them are about magazines, early work, late work, etc. And you can see here how interesting it is to teenagers to be involved in this. And it's very exciting for us to have that involvement and to encourage those people and to help those things happen.
Do you go to every show, or do you try to?
No, not at all. We've got a team of about 8 or 10 people who are working on all the exhibitions.
So here's the map, similar to the one you have. And it shows all the exhibitions that have been held in the different venues. You can't really read it, unfortunately, but it's a lot of things. How many shows is it in total now?
It's about 120, 130 shows. But as you can see, they're everywhere, and we don't try to go to the most important places. We try to go to the places where shows are going to be incredibly welcome and where they're going to change people's lives.
So where is that? I don't know even where some of these places are. That top one in Scotland, is that the Hebrides?
Shetland.
Yeah.
And there's a youth group there called the Northern Lights. And they all came down to the Tate, and we had a great day with Don McCullin, because they've got we've got a great collection of his war photographs. Once again,
I'm jealous.
An enormous amount of it was gift. And
so any standout moments for artist rooms for you, seeing work in unusual places, or is there anything that really has moved you most?
You know, each show is made for that museum, and the involvement of the young people is always very moving. I do remember actually we did a show in Leeds for Damien Hirst. One of the things that struck me was, here is the most famous, infamous, well-known young middle generation artist in this country. You can't see his work anywhere. Literally, you can't see a Damien Hirst show. And so we were at great pains to get wonderful work of us. We did a show in Leeds, and Claire, I remember that it wouldn't have happened without you when you were working for Damien. And I remember we did an evening like this, and I remember in the middle of the evening, some guy of 60 stood up and he said, well, I hear all this stuff that you're talking. I was with Richard Calvacresi of Henry Moore. But I have to tell you, I think it's all rubbish. It's all rubbish, and he isn't a good artist, and you know, that's what I have to say. So I said, do tell me your name, and he said, you know, my name is Smithson, and I said, first of all, can we give a round of applause for Mr. Smithson for having the courage to do that? And then I said, you know, is there any one work that you like at all? Is there anything in any work that you like, or do you think is all complete rubbish? And he thought for a while, and he said, well, there's something about that sheep. There's something, you know, there's something about it. So we had another round of applause. And then he came to me afterwards and he said, you know, I always hated that stuff. Now there's one thing I like. And look at the others and
don't get any ideas doing that tonight. Please. Okay. Oh yes. So this is.
Here we are in Kilmarnock, a really depressed city, doing a Gerhard Richter show, and that good-looking girl, you can see her in the big painting by Gerhard at the back, is Bridget Berlin, who was the girl who was at the front desk of Andy Warhol's factory.
Right to the end as well, she was there.
Right to the end, yeah.
She's in a lot of the films.
Yeah.
And she's still alive, still going. So this is sort of a typical audience, typical school audience for you.
Yeah, and those are the people we are thrilled to see, and that's what Artist Rooms is about. Oh, and here's a glamorous artist. It's that film star Ed Ruscha from Hollywood, who likes to travel first class and have a suite at the Ritz, and he, with enormous generosity, came to Wolverhampton, where we had a beautiful Ed Ruscha show, and we have, Artist Rooms has the largest collection of any museum in the world of Ed Ruscha.
There it is.
And this is one of the 3 or 4 rooms with this famous painting and photographs, I think, of exciting, sexy parking lots, and Hollywood Tantrum, and a book of a vitrine of his books, which you can inspect with an iPad which is attached to it. And it was a thrilling day for everybody in Wolverhampton, and before he left, I asked him if he would consider doing something unbelievably generous, which was giving a painting to Wolverhampton, because they have a little 60s collection. There was a tiny painting of Jackie by Andy, a tiny for Liechtenstein, and he gave them a beautiful small painting to add to their collection.
But he probably wouldn't have done that if he hadn't spent time with the kids, I imagine.
Absolutely. So, talking about living legends.
And again, who knows what the effect will be on those young people having met him? You know, it's a very important moment for them.
But they swoon regularly now.
Yeah.
And then recently, the last big thing we did was work with the Louise Bourgeois estate to put together 4 wonderful rooms of her work, and which had a premiere in Edinburgh. How long ago? Last spring. Yeah, March last spring. And which is now touring, and here it is in Middlesbrough. You all remember Middlesbrough as the home of Captain Cook, I think.
I love the idea, can I just say, I love the idea when you see where Robert Mapplethorpe is living in Shetland Islands. You just think, wow, that's kind of amazing for those artists to be shown in these places where they might not get exposure to such work. I mean, it's kind of mind-bending if you know the work that people are going to be seeing and those opportunities, because
one of the best moments in my life was going to a restaurant in London, and we got chatting with the waitress who said she'd been in Edinburgh. And I said, when you were there as a student, did you see anything really good? She said, I saw, do you know what I saw? I saw a Louise Bourgeois show, and I felt, you know, as a woman, I felt strengthened by seeing that. And that was like, you know, the best moment in my life.
Okay. So we got to contemporary living artists, and this is Martin Creed.
On the Isle of Wight, at Key Art, it's a lovely art centre. We did a beautiful show, and he came and did a gig there. And I must say that it's inspiring to work with Martin. He's an amazing artist and an extraordinary person.
Yes, yes. A lot of music in these. You know, there's a lot of photographs of young people and music, which is a really nice thing. And finally,
here's a secret. If you go and look at this work wearing a blue dress, and you look at it long enough, guess what happens?
You become a chameleon. So this is Seoul, where we think of Margate, we're not sure because it's been in a few places.
Yes.
And I've seen this room and it is absolutely mind-boggling. It's amazing. Every museum should have this room, basically, somewhere.
And it's lovely. It's lovely for, how old is this girl? 5, 6, 4. Yeah.
I think you know, young people that age or around that age, they see contemporary art in a totally different way than we see it, and they actually have no preconceptions. They don't think about the artist who made it. They don't know any of the context necessarily. They just appreciate it for what it is. And I think it's great for young people to be exposed to this sort of work, because they just see it purely as an experience.
And they see it with complete innocence.
Yeah. And it's a lovely image to end on. We will have questions, but firstly, Anthony, thank you. Thank you for having your gallery. Thanks for buying me dinner at the Ritz without any Thank you for all the help on this show, which has been immense, and of course for artist rooms. If there are any questions, we'll take a few. It's 8 o'clock.
And Jeremy, it's a great privilege to work with you.
Oh,
thank you so much.
Thank you for saying that.
Can we all applaud Jeremy?
Any questions? We can take a few. I don't know what time we're meant to end, but if anyone got a question about anything we've talked about, but I'm not going to denounce us from on stage. There's always a 5-second lapse. Hello.
First to say how inspirational it is to hear you talk, and particularly around.
Get up a bit.
Sorry,
Stand up, maybe.
So just to say initially before my question, thank you for such an inspirational talk, Anthony, for talking also about that back in the neck feeling that a painting can give when you turn away from it, and how children can be encouraged to understand that. And a question-wise, I suppose, I read recently a quote that Donald Judd wrote, said, which was that to him Warhol's art was just about colour. And I don't think it was in a denouncing way, but I suppose for him it was all about colour. And whether that was what you believed it to be, and also in relation to the show as a whole, whether it is about colour for you.
Lord. Thank you very much. Interestingly enough, that remark about the way one perceives a work of art and what your relationship is with a work of art, to my mind, to my knowledge, there's no book ever been written about how to visit a museum. And it's a colossal subject, And every time you go to see a big show at the Royal Academy, for example, you see people showing that they don't know how to look at a show. That is to say, they look at each thing with the same attention until they get exhausted. And how one should look at art, and ways of changing that and making it fresh and making it real, and how because we're in the UK, you can go back and see it again, and then drag your parents there, and meet your girlfriend there. What you can do with the museum, so to speak.
I think, if I can add, I think Warhol was a great colourist, and you mentioned it really in those camouflage paintings, how beautiful they are. They are virtually abstract art, aren't they? Let's face it. And the males upstairs have got incredible colour sense to them. And I think, as we know, William Morris was obsessed with colour and with experimenting with colour. And I think that's another thing they have in common. So that could have been the fifth room in the show. Fifth room in the show might have been about colour. We'd had enough time and space and works, but I think they definitely have that in common. And I think Warhol's works are so luscious and beautiful.
I think also that thing, those last words he said to me, I'll make the show for you, Anthony, in really pretty colours. That's such a dumb thing to say, isn't it? I mean, that dumbness of Warhol, that banality, which I believe, the day that, the minute that Andy died, Jeff Koons took that banality and made it central to his art. And I think that without Warhol's work, Jeff Koons couldn't have been the great artist that he is. And, to say that thing about really pretty colours, no other artist would ever say that. And that was central to Andy. And it's the holy fool. You see it in that phrase. And we should remember that. And that also the way that the work has not dated. When you look at, for example, the camouflage painting, it doesn't look like the 60s, it doesn't look like this time, it just looks like, some extraordinary, real thing that looks maybe as though it's about to be made. I think it's how art ages really is how we judge art in the end. Does it stay fresh? Does it stay real? I like enormously Abramovich throwing the yacht into the lagoon, and every time I see it, it looks stronger. That's a great test of art. How does it look when you've seen it a lot? Is it bigger? Is it smaller? Is it redder? Is it blacker? And I think that sort of test, that test of time, that test of familiarity, and the way that the work seems to change and grow, that's certainly true of Andy Warhol and the things that he did, and that is the test of his greatness.
Any other questions? What question? No? Yes.
Could I ask a question? Sorry, or is there one over there?
No, you first, as long as I'm going to denounce us.
Oh yeah, it's terrible. Sorry, I thought it was rubbish. William Morris took his art into politics, he took his art into nature, he took his art into many different spheres.
Yeah.
And that was central. Are we lacking that? Is one of the things that art is not doing today, spreading across all those different genres that Morris took it into? Or was he particularly special?
Well, don't you think that actually Jeremy Deller is doing that in his art and doing it enormously successful? And
don't answer that question.
I wouldn't know.
Without Jeremy, we wouldn't be here this evening, we wouldn't be having this debate, and we wouldn't be having this extraordinary show and the great success for Modern Art Oxford.
Well, thank you for saying that. I'll add, I know that people like Morris and Warhol once century characters, basically, so it's not surprising that there's no one doing quite as much as them, I mean, in terms of just the output of the work, but the times have changed, and I think we're still waiting for the successor to Andy Warhol. you know, the digital equivalent, someone who used the internet in a way that no one else has thought about it. In a way, Warhol predicted the internet, as Morris predicted modernism. But maybe not, but don't despair. There's a question over there, yeah? Yes?
Yeah, I was wondering, Jeremy, if you could say how, give a specific example maybe of how either Morris or Warhol have influenced your own art, to say Latin or Green or, you know, one of your works.
How do they influence me? You can't, I think in a way you don't point to individual works, you point to like the example they made as artists and how they behaved and what they did. I think that's the way. Then as characters really, the whole picture and so on. There's no one work I'd say, oh right, that was it. It's just the whole package almost. And of course for Warhol, all young people like Andy Warhol, don't they? He's irresistible to young people because he just deals with everything that you're interested in yourself, basically. So that's why I was attracted to him as a young person. You know, you get into maybe Picasso or Dali first, and then it's Warhol, and he's a truly still contemporary. Those guys are modern artists, but he's still contemporary, even though he's been dead for nearly 30 years.
Yeah, so I say that works feel alive,
Yeah.
and that's an incredible test.
Yeah.
And you can't say that of many artists
Absolutely not.
dead 30 years ago, but their work feels alive today. It's a really powerful, amazing thing.
If there's no more questions, I might wrap up. That's okay. We can all go home now. We'll go and demonstrate against Marina Penn. So thank you very much again for coming, and keep visiting the show and buying the catalogue and all those kinds of things. Supporting modern art Oxford. Thank you very much.